of all, welcome everyone who's here tonight. We really appreciate you attending tonight's webinar. This is part of the 15 webinar series, Learn to Deer Hunt. The series offers a dynamic lineup of presentations and materials curated by the New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program. It covers a wide variety of topics to guide new deer hunters from pre-season scouting to processing. The series is hosted and moderated by the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and I'm Liz Rutledge from the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. I'm the Director of Wildlife Resources, and it's in conjunction with South Wake Conservationists chapter. And so we'll have some general housekeeping here. We ask that everyone stay muted throughout the webinar until we have the Q&A session at the end, and that's just to prevent feedback during the speaker. Also, this webinar is being recorded for future use, so if you do not want to be seen on the video recording, just be sure to turn your camera off now. And we ask that you either put your questions in the chat box during the presentation and we'll read them during the Q&A session, or during the Q&A you may raise your hand and be called on. And to raise your hand, there's a little symbol up in the top right corner of your screen, so you just click on that and then we'll call on you. And yeah, so moving right along, I will take a few minutes here to just talk a little bit about some of the programming that the Wildlife Federation has. We are actively involved in recruitment, retention, reactivation. So this is all related to, in this case, hunting. And so we have a program called Academics of Field, and that is for NC State college students. We're getting them outside, students who are new to hunting, and giving them a mentored experience in the field. We also do Getting Started Outdoors with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. So this is very similar, but these are non-college students, and so we're getting them involved, teaching them how to hunt, and putting them in some mentored events, and hoping that they'll be successful in the field. And we have the Camo Coalition, which is our online outdoor advocacy network. So you can go to the North Carolina Wildlife Federation website and sign up if you'd like to receive updates about wildlife and policy. The Federation also supports Artemis, which is a program from the National Wildlife Federation, and it's dedicated toward sportswomen and conservation. So if you have any interest in that in the future, feel free to check it out on our website. And here tonight, we have the New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program, Learn to Deer Hunt webinar series. And then we also are part of the Wildlife Resources Commission skills-based seminars, which are Deer Hunting 101 and From Field to Freezer. So, and then we work jointly with North Carolina Hunters for the Hungry on deer processing across the state to help get some venison in to feed the hungry. And so we will go to the next slide now. And the seminar series was curated by the New Hill Education and Mentoring Program and the facilitating partners that are listed on the slide. The webinars are for adults that are new to deer hunting, and it includes practical topics to explore the ins and outs of hunting to enhance your overall outdoor experience. And please see the New Hill Education and Mentoring Program Facebook page for more information on field opportunities. And now we'll go. I'm happy to introduce tonight's guest speaker, which is Brian Padgett. I'll provide a little bit of background on the speaker, and then I'll let him introduce the webinar topic for this evening. So, a lifelong hunter and shooting enthusiast, Brian Padgett has been involved in hunter education and training for over 10 years. During this time, Brian has taught hunter education courses and has worked with national and state organizations to help recruit and mentor new hunters through seminars, field days, and mentored deer camps. Brian is currently serving as a founding member and senior mentor of the New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program. So we're very happy to have you here with us tonight, Brian, and I will turn it over to you and get started.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Thanks for the introduction. We'll go ahead and get started. Tonight, I'm going to cover a range of topics with you and regarding firearms selection. And not only the selection of a firearm, but I'm going to focus on how you can clean your firearm of choice, how you can mount a scope, optics, if you wish. And we're going to wrap up by taking a look at how to sight in your firearm. So first things first, and this is the big question that a lot of people really struggle with when they're first trying to select a firearm, is what's the action type that you want to go with? Well, I will preface what I'm about to tell you with one very basic truth. A lot of this has to do with what you like. Each one of these action types can make a very fine deer hunting firearm. So it's a little bit about personal choice, but really quick, I wanted to go over some of the pros and cons of the major action types, just so you'll be aware of them. We're going to start off with the bolt action. The bolt action is probably the most commonly widely available action type. You'll probably see more bolt actions in the field than any other action type, and you can get the bolt action chambered in a wide variety of cartridges, ranging from all the way from the 22 long rifle up to elephant stomping cartridges like the 458. It is a very rigid, strong action that lends itself very well to accuracy. They're very easy to maintain and clean, and for that reason, I think that's why you see a tremendous popularity with bolt actions. Moving over, well, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you've got a break action. This is also a very strong action type, but there are some cons with the break action. Obviously, with a break action, you're not going to get off shots as fast as you would with a bolt action, but it is a strong action, very accurate, and it's also very easy to clean and maintain. So both of those are, I would think, a little bit more easy to maintain for the first-time firearm owner because of their simplistic action. Now, moving up to the lever action, and in this picture, the lever action is a standard Marlin 30-30. You'd see a lot of these. 30-30s are very commonly chambered round in the lever action. This action, it is a little bit more complicated. There's more working parts and pieces, and it's a little bit harder to clean and maintain, but it is a fine action for deer. Some of the things you do need to be aware of with this type of action: it is a little bit faster than the bolt, but it's not as strong. You don't tend to see fast shooting cartridges like the 270 or the 7mm mag in this action type. And it is a little bit harder to shoot off the bench, which a lot of people don't think of. But when you're trying to shoot this off the bench, the actual lever can get in the way. The pump and the semi-automatic action both bring speed to the game. Both of these will allow you to get off quite a few more shots than you would with some of the other action types. But again, they're a little bit harder to maintain due to more working parts, especially in the case of the semi-automatic. But at the end of the day, what I would encourage you to do is, the best advice I can give you is, if you're interested in a certain action type, or maybe a couple, and you want to narrow it down, the best advice I can give you is to go to a local range and see if you can find someone or a friend maybe, and try some of these out before you make the purchase. I don't think you can go wrong with any selection. Each firearm is pretty much tailor-made to the individual. I myself prefer bolts, but I have used most of the other action types at one time or another. Now, the big thing, once you get over the action type, there's some considerations you need to bring into play. And this is a ballistics table. I'm not going to go over this at length, but there are some things I want to point out on this ballistics table that will help you making the determination for what cartridge you want to go with. So over here on the left-hand column, we have a range of very commonly available deer hunting cartridges, ranging from the 243 all the way down to the bottom of the table. You got the 300 Win Mag. Now, when you're selecting a cartridge, energy level is something you need to consider. How much energy should your cartridge bring to the table to cleanly harvest a deer? Well, the first column on this table in light orange is the energy level that your cartridge in your bullet combination, which is the second row. If you, for example, at the top of the table, if you look at 243 Winchester, I've given you 3 common deer hunting bullet types, ranging from the Hornady 90 grain ELDX up to the Nosler 90 grain AccuBond. So what you want to look at when you're looking at these ballistics columns is the first column at 100 yards. will tell you how much energy that actual cartridge is delivering. Now, at 100 yards, what you're shooting for to cleanly harvest a white-tailed deer is about 1,000 foot-pounds of energy. So you want a cartridge that's going to deliver about 1,000 foot-pounds of energy at the target. Well, if you scroll down the table, look down toward the bottom of the table, you have the 300 blackout. That cartridge is right at the 1,000 foot-pound level plateau, right at 100 yards. What does that tell me? Well, the 300 blackout would be a fine deer cartridge at 100 yards, but look what happens to the energy levels when you go up to 200 yards. They drop from 1,000 to 775, 735, somewhere in that neighborhood, depending on which exact combination you're using. So that's the first thing I want you to focus on. Look at the energy level that you're looking to shoot for. Now, if you're looking for just a deer gun or just a deer rifle, focus on 1,000 foot-pounds. But you might be wanting a rifle that can do double duty. Maybe take on elk, for example. Well, elk cartridges, you need about 1,500 pounds of energy. So you would need, and that's at the target. So you would need to take that into take that into determination when you're trying to choose your cartridge. Now, other than energy, obviously you want to choose a cartridge that is widely available. The cartridges on this table were hand selected because they are fairly commonly available. Now, if you want to stray off the path a little bit and get a cartridge like I'm just picking one at random here, but let's say you wanted to try a 270 WSM, Winchester Short Mag. That cartridge is a fine cartridge for deer, but it's a little bit harder to find than the cartridges on this table, and that's something you need to take into consideration too. And the last thing that you need to consider is over on the far right of this table. When you're choosing a cartridge, recoil comes into play. Recoil is the amount of pushback that you're going to get on your shoulder, because some of these cartridges can kill on both ends. For example, the 300 Winchester Magnum, if you look at the recoil at the very bottom of the table, that's anywhere between 23 and 26 foot-pounds. That's significant. Now, how much recoil does the average person feel? Well, research has shown that once you get over about 16 foot-pounds of recoil, and that's right at where the 270 is, the 270 Winchester, once you get above 16 foot-pounds, even if you're a fairly large individual, you're going to feel it. And you can see the difference. If you take a cartridge like the 270, which is about 16 foot-pounds of energy, take that and compare it to a 243 Winchester, which is down at about, somewhere right around 10 foot-pounds. There's a tremendous difference between those two cartridges. And when you go up to a Magnum, like a 7mm mag or a 300 mag, there's a big difference. Now, there are ways that you can tame recoil. If you want to shoot something with a little more power, like the 300 Win Mag or even the 7mm mag, you can compensate for that by getting a slightly heavier gun. That's going to dampen the effects of recoil. And you can actually, things like butt pads, you can add to the gun, or even muzzle brakes. I'm not going to go into too much deal on muzzle brakes, though, although I will say, if you do add a muzzle brake to a firearm, please, please, please don't forget to wear your hearing protection at all times. Yes, muzzle brakes are very effective at reducing recoil, but they come with a horrific price, and that's the sheer volume. They can make an already loud gun tremendously loud, and one mistake, not wearing earplugs, and you can pay for it. So there's a lot of decisions to make, and I promise you, if you ask 10 deer hunters what their favorite cartridge is, you'll probably get 11 different answers. Now, once you've chosen your firearm, then we're going to transition into how to properly clean your firearm. And the first thing I need to do is tell you when you need to clean your firearm. Rule number one, if you purchase a brand new firearm, you're going to need to clean it. The reason for that is new firearms are sometimes coated with rust preventative because it's really meant for longer term storage. They don't know how long it's going to be before they sell their firearm to you. So you'll need to do a really good thorough cleaning before you shoot it for the very first time. If you're buying a used firearm, make sure you have a gunsmith inspect it, make sure it's functional. And under number 2 on this, you will hear people talk about barrel break-in procedures. So let's say you've got a new gun, how do you break in your barrel? Well, barrel break-in procedures, they're going to differ from manufacturer to manufacturer. Some barrel manufacturers tell you exactly what procedures you need to follow when you're, some break-in procedures, for example, will stress that you clean it, shoot it, clean it again, shoot it again. And you may repeat that clean shoot cycle for, 10 straight shots. The important thing to do is, if you have a new firearm, read up into how that break-in procedure should go and follow those directions. But I will tell you this, you'll read a lot of different things about break-in procedure because there's a lot of variance and belief out there about what a true barrel break-in procedure should look like. Now, what I'm going to focus on today is not the actual break-in procedure, which you follow when you first buy a gun. I'm going to teach you how to clean your firearm after that break-in procedure is done. So what do you need to properly clean a firearm? Well, not a lot, but there are 3 pieces that I really want to draw attention to. The first one, the top picture on the far right, you need a good single-piece coated steel cleaning rod. Do not use the small, cheap cleaning rods that are multi-piece rods. That's a quick way to actually ruin a good firearm. Now, the cleaning rod that you see in the picture is a Dewey cleaning rod. That's the important thing about that Dewey is the red handle that's in my hand right there, that handle will spin so that when you're pushing that rod through the actual barrel, by the fact that it spins like that, it doesn't get hung up. It's very kind on the actual barrel itself because it's coated in a heavy rubber. So the Dewey cleaning rod is not the only cleaning rod that's good, but you want to focus on using a single piece coated cleaning rod. Now, the other thing you need to look at obtaining is a good jag, and I will explain what a jag is and what it does here in just a second. But the jags, like you see in the bottom picture in the box, these are what you're going to spear your patches with and actually clean your barrel with. Now, if you're serious about really cleaning that barrel, you're going to be focused on 2 things. You're going to be focused on getting the carbon out, which is the black, but then you've got to get copper residue out. Now, copper residue, when you're cleaning your gun, it's going to look a light blue in color. And a lot of people have jags that are basically brass jags. Well, if you're using a brass jag, that's going to give you a false positive. Brass jags will actually be attacked by the solvents that you're using to clean your gun, and it's going to result in a false positive for your copper. So you're going to think you still have copper in your gun because you're going to get blue patches coming out, but it's actually from your jag. Bortec, and I'm trying not to name brand names as much as I can, but this example from Bortec is an example of what they call a proof positive patch jag. That is a non-reactive jag that will not react with your solvent, and it allows you to know the minute you've got all the copper out of your firearm. So I do like to have either plastic or steel jags that are not going to give you that false positive for copper. Now, at the very bottom of this slide is probably the most essential piece that you can get, and that is a good quality bore guide that will actually help to keep the rod straight as you're cleaning your firearm. And in the pictures I'm going to show you just in a second, you'll see how that bore guide works. So let's walk through the steps you'll need to properly clean your firearm. First thing you'll need to do is obtain some cotton patches. I get my patches in large bags, and I like 2 different types of patches. I like round patches for cleaning the barrel itself, and then I use larger square patches when I'm cleaning the external surface of the firearm. But in a jam, and I do this quite often. I will borrow a cotton shirt from an unsuspecting family member and cut that up. So if you run out of your official patches, you can get creative. So bore solvents, what do you need to clean your gun? Well, I usually like a good light oil for the exterior surfaces, and I use rim oil a lot, but you can also use WD-40 for that. But when it comes to the actual barrel itself, you want to use a solvent that will actually take out some of the copper from your barrel. You really need to get rid of that copper for a good clean. And that's where a lot of people make a mistake. They will actually select a solvent that might, it might look like you're cleaning your gun because you're getting a lot of black out of the barrel, but you may not be taking that copper out. I do use Butch's Bore Shine. It is a solvent that does remove copper, but be very careful. There are some products on the market that are very high in ammonium hydroxide content that are very rough and aggressive on barrels. Butch's does have ammonia in it. You can smell it the minute you open the bottle, but it is a very low concentration. So that's the one thing I would encourage you to do. Do a little bit of research before you buy a solvent, and just do a Google search, see what the ammonium hydroxide content is, and read reviews to see how that product is performing. Now, at the very bottom of the slide, you need a good phosphor bronze brush, and the brush you see in the picture is actually very typical of the brush I use. There are some folks that think that phosphor bronze brushes will damage rifling in barrels. That's not true. The phosphor bronze is much softer. It's not going to be a problem if you keep your actual rod straight when you're cleaning your firearm. You should have no problems. So, step-by-step process. Very first step when you're cleaning your gun, make sure your firearm is not loaded, and you'll want to do that twice. Check. One of the first things you're going to do is take the bolt out anyway. So once you've verified that the firearm is not loaded, you'll want to either set it in a gun vise or a gun cradle. And to be honest with you, I use shooting bags. You can see 2 shooting bags on the bench that I use because it's just faster for me. So once you have verified that it's not loaded, you want to remove the bolt from the firearm. And if you don't have a bolt action, you may have to deviate slightly from this procedure. These bore guides will work with certain action types. Certain action types, like the lever action, they won't work with. But in this picture, I've taken the bolt out and I've inserted my guide. And that guide, you'll see, has a small hole in it toward the back. Well, that's where you can actually pour your solvent onto a small cotton patch. So let's take a look at that. So here's, on the first picture at the top, I've taken my jag and I've speared a cotton patch. Now, when I'm actually spearing that patch, I'm going to do it slightly off center of the patch, and then I'm going to wet it with my solvent of choice. Now, honestly, I actually usually will just dip that into a small amount of solvent, but at the bottom, in the bottom picture, you can see that if you wanted to, you could actually just drip the solvent through that port directly onto the patch, whichever you prefer. But the most important thing, notice the direction that the rod is traveling in the bottom picture. Never, ever clean from the barrel end. You always want to push the rod through the action end of the firearm so that the actual jag exits the end of the barrel. So that's what I've done in these 2 pictures. I've speared myself a patch, I've put some solvent on it, and I'm going to just slowly run that first patch down the barrel. And what that first patch is doing, guys, it's actually removing, yes, it is true that it pushes some of the debris out of the bore, but what it's doing is it's wetting the bore to prepare it for brushing, which is our next step. So once you've used your patch and wet your barrel, then comes the brushing. So what you're going to do is switch over from your jag to your phosphor bronze brush, and then you're going to wet that, the bronze brush itself, you're going to wet it with solvent, And then you're going to make about 15 to 20 passes. And I usually count those in both directions. So one pass down the barrel is 1, coming back will be 2. And the only thing you have to remember, never reverse a brush mid-bore. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're pushing through the barrel, don't get halfway down the barrel and bring it back. Always make one smooth motion and always completely exit the bore, and then you can bring it back. Now, let me stop for just a second. I don't like bringing these bronze brushes back. I'll send them all the way down through the barrel, and then I let it exit the end of the barrel, and then I'll actually take the brush off and pull my rod out. Why do I do that? I don't want to hit the crown, which is at the very end of your barrel. I'm very paranoid about doing damage to the crown of the firearm. Now, a lot of people don't have that problem. They'll just bring it back through. There's a little controversy over that. I prefer to just take my time. So I'll take the rod, go entirely through the barrel, and then when it comes out of the barrel, I'll unscrew it, bring it back, screw it back in, and then make another pass. Is it time consuming? Yes. A lot of people don't have time for that. And I've seen a lot of folks that will just, they don't take it off. They'll just run, all the way through the barrel, and then they'll pull it straight back. But once your brushing is completed, and you really do want to give it about 15 to 20 passes to get all that copper out of there. It takes quite a bit of, especially if you've done some extended shooting sessions, really pay attention to how much your patches are telling you as well. If you continue to get crud out of your barrel, you continue to see copper and coming off of your actual brush. You can actually see it on your brush sometimes. Just give it some more scrubbing. So once your brushing is complete, that's when you're going to put the jag back on, and you're going to spear yourself another patch, one patch, and run it through one more time. And then you're going to just let that sit for a while. And I usually give it 10 to 15 minutes. Some people far less than that. But so that's the process. You'll take your bronze brush, you'll run it 15 to 20 passes through the barrel. Once you're satisfied that you've actually done a good cleaning job, then you'll take your jag, run one wet patch with your solvent through the barrel, and then let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, when that's done, after your soak, you're going to then take one last patch, or maybe two, and you're going to use that last patch with a very small amount of solvent. And the purpose here, I don't like to leave the ammonia solvent in the barrel once I'm done. Now, I've heard that the Butch's bore shine will absolutely be fine, and some people do leave it in. Once they finish their cleaning, they'll leave that Butch's in the barrel for a short amount of time, no problem. If it's a high ammonia solvent, no way. I would get if you're using a very aggressive ammonia solvent, I would absolutely make sure that you get all of that out of the barrel, because it can react. Butch's bore shine, a lot of folks do when they finish their cleaning procedure. They'll just leave a thin layer of that in the barrel, and there's been no problems noted with that. I myself, when I finish my cleaning, I actually like to take a very small amount of rim oil, and I'll just send one patch down the barrel, and that's how I'll store the gun until my next shooting. Now, the exterior surfaces, there's not a lot you can go wrong with the exterior surfaces, especially if you're shooting a synthetic stock firearm. But the one thing I do want to warn you about is, if you are shooting a wooden stock firearm, please make sure that either rim oil or WD-40, make sure it does not get into the wood. That, especially if your wood doesn't have a good protective coating over it, that oil can cause long-term problems with your wooden stock. So if you do have a wooden stock firearm, absolutely clean your metalwork, but be careful not to get it onto any wood. Okay, so that's just a quick review of some cleaning basics. And it sounds like a lot of information, and it really is. I will also tell you that there's more than one way to skin a cat. There are lots of different cleaning techniques you can use. And over time, you're probably going to develop your own cleaning procedure. Almost everybody I know that has a firearm has a slightly different way of cleaning it, but it's all the same basic concepts. You're starting out by using a patch, getting some solvent in your barrel to make it wet. You're following that up with phosphor bronze brushing to loosen the deposits inside the barrel, including the copper. And then your last step, once that is done, is you're going to leave a light trace of oil, especially if you're going to store the firearm, let's say for an extended period of time during seasons or whatever, or between shootings. You want to leave a light trace of oil in the barrel. Now, the one thing that most people do forget is the bolt itself. If you purchase a new firearm, you should have an owner's manual with your firearm that will tell you the points that you need to oil. And when you use oil on a bolt, a very little bit goes a very long way. Do not, a few drops should be all you need on the bolt body. And then you'll also, now this is going to be even more infrequently, but you might need to apply grease to your bolt as well to keep those parts functioning well. In this picture you see here, I'm about to apply a small bead of grease on the back side of the locking lugs. That is a very common, it's a heavy friction area that sees a lot of mechanical abuse. When you first get your a bolt action from the factory, if you look real close, you'll probably see a small bead of grease on the back of those locking lugs. And over time, that's going to wear away. And a lot of people don't realize that those locking lugs get a tremendous amount of wear. So it's a good idea to put a very small, and again, small is the key word here. A lot of this stuff goes a long way. Put it on the back of those locking lugs. Now, once you buy your firearm, another thing that you're going to possibly consider, depending on what type of firearm you want, you might want to mount an optic of some type, a scope. So let's talk about a few things that you might need to consider when you're actually mounting a scope. So first choice you have to make, and this can be a little intimidating, is what type of bases and rings do I need to match my particular firearm? Well, if you're new to shooting, you're going to find out real quick that there's a lot of nomenclature out there, and there's a lot of different ring sizes, base sizes. The first thing you want to focus on, are you looking at a 1-inch scope or a 30mm scope? 1-inch scopes have a 1-inch scope tube. Up until very recently, that pretty much all you saw in the hunt and field were 1-inch scopes. Now, with the big demand for long-range shooting, you're starting to see more and more 30mm scopes, which have a thicker tube. Well, the rings that you buy, yep, there are some rings that are 1-inch rings. There are some that fit the bigger 30mm tubes. And again, the tube is talking about the actual thickness of the scope tube here. Both of these are 1-inch rifle scopes. A 30mm tube is going to be quite a bit bigger. If you ever look at them side by side, I don't think you'll ever confuse them again. Now, the other thing is what type of ring height, how high do your rings have to be? Well, in this picture right here, I think you can see my mouse. You've got two different firearms. On the bottom, you've got an older Remington 22, and the bolt on this particular gun does not come very far up when you're actually working the bolt. So I was able to get a scope with very low rings, and I could mount that scope really close to the actual barrel, that's what I usually like. The lower to the bore you can get when you're mounting a scope, the better off you are. Now, this top firearm is a Ruger Model 7722. The bolt on these, when you actually, and I actually opened the bolt here so you can see how high it goes. If you were to try to mount this scope very, very low, your bolt would actually smack the back of the scope here, the ocular lens, and that would actually contact it and do damage. So I had to actually use higher rings on this Ruger for my bolt clearance here. Now, when you're choosing your ring size and your ring height, the best advice I can give you is to identify a manufacturer that makes rings and such as Leopold. This is a one-piece base that Leopold makes, and you can actually plug in the model number of your firearm, and you can look at their website, and they'll recommend a good base and ring set to start with. And sometimes it is trial and error, guys. I've actually purchased rings here for firearms only to find out they were a little bit too low. And so my advice to you would be to keep your factory packaging intact until you know it's going to work. That way you can take it back if you have to. But in the end, that's the hardest part, I think, is finding out what type of base you want, what type of ring you want. After you make that decision, the rest is easy. So let's take a look at the steps that you would go through to actually mount a scope to a firearm. Now, what items do you need to mount a scope? Well, not a lot. The first thing I would recommend, and a lot of people don't use these, I would recommend that you buy a good torque wrench. This wrench right here actually comes with a kit. At the bottom here, you see, I actually own this kit, and it's a fairly cheap kit. I think I paid $80 for it. It's a Wheeler kit, very common in the industry for mounting 1-inch scopes, and it comes with all the major tools you're going to use. But I'll also be honest with you, I've mounted a lot of scopes without a torque wrench. But the torque wrench is key, because if you put too much pressure when you're trying to mount a scope, you can actually damage the scope. And if you're not skilled with it, a good torque wrench is your best friend. It will let you apply an exact amount of torque, and I always follow the factory recommendations. So what do you get in this kit? Well, you get a good torque wrench. You get some scope alignment bars, which we'll look at in just a second. I'll show you how they work. In some cases, you may have to lap your rings. So you get a good lapping bar with this kit. All of this we'll talk about here in just a second. You'll see it. You'll see some pictures to help you understand what these parts do. And then the most important part is you'll have some levels in here. That's absolutely essential to make sure your scope is actually level when you install it on your firearm. And again, I'll explain this here shortly. Now, do you have to buy the kit? No, you can buy components individually, or you can buy it as a kit. And if you don't mount a lot of scopes, if you only have one firearm and you only need to mount once, you may just pay somebody to do this. I tend to love to shoot, and I can't leave well enough alone. If I get a scope on a gun and it's shooting good, I don't think twice about taking that scope off and throwing it on another gun, which is not exactly smart, but I find myself doing it over and over. So here are the step-by-step directions. First thing, again, before you start doing anything, you need to make sure that that firearm is unloaded. And now if you've got a bolt action, obviously remove the bolt completely. You want to keep that muzzle pointed in a safe direction at all times, and that doesn't matter whether you're cleaning the gun or mounting a scope. So always think safety first. But once you're satisfied that your firearm's been unloaded, then you want to take the fact that when you first receive a firearm, you're probably going to have small screws that are going to need to be removed. These screws were installed at the factory. So I usually take a small jeweler screwdriver, which you can see in the picture here, and I'll remove these factory installed scope base screws, and I'll put them in a Ziploc bag just in case I ever need them in the future. I've got a whole lot of Ziploc bags laying around here somewhere with these small screws in them. Now, this is where your torque wrench is going to come in handy. The next step is to actually place your base of choice on your firearm using the recommended torque value for the manufacturer. Now, in this particular example here, I'm using a Picatinny base. That's where my scope rings are going to sit on. And when I bought this particular Picatinny base, I looked up on the manufacturer website. They told me if you're going to install this on your gun, to use about 25 inch-pounds of torque. So I can dial in 25 pounds on my torque wrench, and I know that I'm tightening this exactly to factory settings. And down here, this is a different firearm down here. This is actually a Leopold one-piece base, but the same principle applies. I can go onto their website, and it will tell me how much torque that I need when I'm installing my base. again, the torque wrench just lets you put just the right amount of torque when you're tightening your screws. Now, once your base is installed, then you want to put your rings on, but you don't want to put the top caps on. So right here, I've got the bottom portion of my rings installed on my base, but I don't want to put the top cap on the rings yet, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that these two rings are in perfect alignment when I've installed them on my firearm. Now, as part of that kit that I was telling you about, you get these two pieces of metal here that act as a guide to show you if your rings are perfectly parallel with one another. And you can see by the point here in the middle that these Leopold rings are in perfect alignment. So once I'm satisfied that they're perfectly aligned, now I'm ready to get serious. Now, these rings, when you buy rings, there is a good chance that if you were to put a scope in here, that these rings might not be perfectly concentric. What do I mean by that? Well, you might have to lap your rings, and that is a process. Up here is a lapping bar, and this comes with that kit I was telling you about. This is a lapping bar that you put a little bit of 220 grit lapping compound on this bar, and then you'll put the bar in the rings and tighten down the rings a little bit. Not really tight, but you'll just tighten down the top rings. And then this lapping compound, you're going to have this lapping compound coated on the outside of this bar, and you're going to take this knob and work that bar back and forth, up and down. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to use this 220 grit. It's basically like sandpaper. You're sanding the inside of these rings so that they're absolutely perfectly circular. Now, why do you want that? When you install your scope, you want as much surface area contact as possible on that scope. And some rings, when you buy them from the factory, you may be only touching about 30 to 40% of that scope with surface area. So what you're doing when you're lapping these rings is you're basically making these perfectly circular with each other, so that when you put your scope in, it's going to have a lot more surface area to grab. Now, if you really want to see how effective this technique works, look at your rings, the inside surface of your rings. You can take your rings off and look at them, and you can see where all of that sanding that you're doing is impacting. These rings, if they're not really good from the factory, you'll see that you've done quite a bit of work on it, because you can see where the black paint has been removed. Now, do you have to do this lapping process? For years and years, most people did not focus on this. If you're just hunting and all you're doing is hunting, it's probably not mandatory to do this. But if you really want to get into long-range shooting and make sure that your equipment's performing as good as possible, then yes, it's probably a good idea to lap your rings. There is one exception. If you buy tally rings, be very careful. Tally rings are CNC machined, and they'll tell you on the package, do not use lapping compound with tally rings, because since they're so precisely manufactured, there's a good chance you could just mess them up. Now, so once your rings are in alignment, and you may or may not choose to try to actually use the compound to grind them down further. But once your rings are in alignment on your firearm, you're ready for the next step, was to actually place your scope on the gun. So what you want to do is, the first thing you want to do is level your firearm. And most people do this in a gun vise or a gun cradle. I actually still use bags. It is a little bit harder using bags because the gun will move, but I've done this over and over and over again. I feel pretty comfortable with it. So if you take your firearm, there is a small level that comes from with the kits, and you can buy these individually as well. And what I like to do is lay these levels on the bolt raceway. There are two flat surfaces that the bolt will glide on when it's in operation, and they're perfectly level. So if you take your level and lay it right here and just watch the bubble in your level, your first job is to get this firearm absolutely completely level before you start looking at adding your scope. The next step you're going to do is, okay, so here I've got 2 levels on the firearm. You can still see the level I've got in the bolt raceway right here, and it's perfectly level. This is where it takes a lot of careful attention, and it can be a little frustrating at times. Just spend the time to get it right. What you're going to do is you're going to place your scope inside your rings, and you're just going to barely tighten these rings, and you're wanting to make sure that the scope itself, which is right here, and right here, this level, I've taken and placed it on top of your scope turret here for your elevation. And that is a flat surface. Now, on some scopes, this little cap right here may not be perfectly level. You may have to take the cap off and actually put it on underneath the cap. But on this particular scope, the cap was completely flat, so I was able to lay this level here, and I'll just take my hands and barely rotate the scope until this level and this level both indicate that I've got a perfect level on with the scope and the bore. Now, if you've never done a scope like this, you're probably going to hold it up to your eyes, and you're going to look at the crosshairs and think, oh man, this is way off. Well, in all honesty, it's probably not the gun, it's probably you. It's been, when I was younger, I used to shoot scopes quite a bit. I would mount them. I would not pay attention to leveling the scopes. And the crosshairs looked good to me. When I pulled up the firearm and looked at the crosshairs with my naked eye, it looked perfect. The first time I ever leveled a scope like this, I pulled it up and looked at it and thought, oh man, this is way off. You have to get used to it. But it only takes, after the first time you do this, it'll take you, a couple of shootings to get used to it. But once you get used to it, trust the level. Now, why is this important? Well, again, if you're shooting or you're hunting and you're only taking 100 to 200 yard shots, is it mandatory that you absolutely have your scope level? No, it's not. However, it does become a big deal if you want to stretch your firearm and take longer and longer shots. Let's say you want to go to the range and you want to see how your new 6.5 PRC is going to do at extended ranges. If you want to go out to 700, 800, 900 yards, you do need a level scope, because if the scope is not quite level, that's going to throw your bullet off just a fraction, but that's going to amount to a big error when you get out to extended ranges. So again, do you have to level a scope for under normal hunting conditions in North Carolina? No, but the way I look at it, you've got a new firearm. It's probably best to get the job done right from the start. And then if you ever do want to shoot long, you'll be in a good position to do that. So that's just some basics on mounting a scope. And I tell you, having the right tools can make a big difference. So it might be a good idea to make a small investment in obtaining some of these tools. Now, we've talked a little bit about cleaning firearms. We've talked a little bit about mounting scopes. The last thing I want to talk to you is, how do you sight your firearm in once you've got your scope attached? Well, I want to walk you through the basics for sighting in. Now, if you buy a firearm, let's say you have just purchased a firearm, and the gentleman that sold you the firearm has told you that it's bore sighted. We've had a lot of new hunters that think that bore sighted means you're good to go. Well, bore sighting is basically just getting you on paper so that you have a pretty good chance of hitting your target somewhere on the paper when you shoot. It does not mean you're completely sighted in. Common ways to bore sight include devices like the ones you see on this slide. In the bottom right, it's really common for laser bore sighters to be used, but honestly, you don't need it. Now, if you want to pay somebody to bore sight your gun, that's fine. But if you don't, with some action types, it's possible to do a bore sight yourself. Not all action types. You can't do this with a semi-automatic, for example. But if you have a bolt action, all you have to do is first set your gun down on a good set of bags, and then you want to focus on you want to find you a target. I would actually recommend a target at 25 yards to start off with. And then you want to remove the bolt from your firearm. Just take it completely out. Set the firearm down on a fixed rest, and then you're going to look with your eye through the barrel and aim your barrel at the target. Now, at the same time that you're looking at the target with your eye, you can make a rough adjustment with your scope to align with the target. That's called the old school bore sighting. Again, you're just taking the bolt out, you're finding you a target, and you're looking down the barrel with your naked eye, and you're centering the target you want. And again, don't choose a far off target. That's going to be much harder. Start with a big target at 25 yards with a big orange dot or a big red dot. Those are much easier to focus on. So you just look down the barrel while your barrel is pointing straight at the target. Then you want to reach up your scope and adjust the scope so that it aligns with your target. That'll get you on paper. Now, about the scope, you've got two adjustments on any scope. You've got these are the turrets on your scope, and right here's the paragraph that you're looking at right here. If you want to adjust your scope from left to right, those left to right adjustments are called windage adjustments, and they're going to be controlled by the turret on the side of the scope. And then you've got the up and down adjustments, which are your elevation adjustments. They're controlled by your top turret. So the easiest way to sight in a firearm, once you've got it bore sighted and you can hit paper, I like to start out at 50 yards. So put yourself a target up at 50 yards, and then you're going to fire one shot and see where you fall on the paper. And then you're going to use your turrets. Again, the one on the side of the scope is left to right. The one on the top of the scope is up and down. And you're going to adjust over using clicks from your turrets. Now, here's where a lot of people mess up. If you look on your scope, they're going to tell you how much you're going to move with each click of your scope. Most scopes, well, the vast majority of scopes, they're going to move 1/4 of an inch for every click you make at 100 yards. Now, if you back up and you're shooting at 50, be careful. One click of your scope at 50 yards is going to move your target 1/8 of an inch. So, and that's where a lot of people get confused. So the first thing you have to do is find out how much your scope is going to move with each click. Again, most of your scopes, it's going to be 1/4 of an inch every time you make a click at 100 yards, but not all scopes are the same. Some scopes, maybe target scopes, for an example, if you have a target scope, it's possible that one click might only move it 1/8 of an inch. But this is pretty industry standard for most hunting scopes. One click, 1/4 of an inch at 100 yards. So if you think about that, if you're 1 inch off target at 100 yards, you only need 4 clicks to move your bullet impact over 1 inch. But at 50 yards, if you're not sighting in at 100 yards, remember, one click is going to be 1/8 of an inch. So in this example right here, this picture, this is an actual target that I was shooting with a 22 some years ago. You can see, now I used gridded targets, and each one of these grids right here is exactly 1 inch. So I can see that this shot right here was about just shy of 1.5 inches to the left of my target. Now this target was at 50 yards. So if I wanted to move, if I wanted to move the point of impact to get me to dead center, I would need to go about 1.5 inches. Well, 1 inch at 50 yards would be 8 clicks, because each click is 1/8 of an inch. 8 clicks would take me over 1 full inch. And then I added a few more. It's not quite 1/2 inch. So this would be, if I were adjusting this, I'd probably move it 8 clicks for the inch, and then maybe 2 or 3 more, and that would put me somewhere here. Now, since my bullet impact was to the left of the target, I'm going to move this to the right. So I'm going to use my windage adjustments on the side of my scope, and I'm going to adjust using, I'm going to basically adjust to the right about 10 clicks will put you right here. Now, once you get your group centered at 50 yards, then you can move it out to 100 yards and fine tune that group at 100 yards. And I think you'll be fine as long as you remember the golden rule. 1 click equals 1/4 of an inch at 100 yards, but 1 click only equals 1/8 of an inch at 50 yards. And now, if you can't, maybe you want to write that down if you can't remember that, but if that confuses a lot of people when they're first sighting in their gun. And I think with a little bit of practice, you'll find out that you can get sighted in fairly quickly. Now, there is one more very critical thing I want to tell you. If you are concerned with hunting, you want to choose a cartridge that you feel comfortable hunting with. And once you sight in with that cartridge, that's what you need to stay with. If you try to use a different brand of ammunition for your gun, maybe the bullet weight's different, the speed might be a little different, your point of impact can actually vary quite a bit. And I've seen that mistake made by a lot of new hunters. They'll sight in their gun and you ask them, hey, what did you sight your gun in with? If they don't know the cartridge that they sighted their gun in with and they're just using whatever ammunition they can find, don't be surprised if your point of impact is quite a bit different. So my best advice I can give you is to identify yourself when you first buy a firearm. I would identify 2 to 3 good deer hunting bullets that you want to use with your firearm, and then see how the performance is. Firearms are very picky instruments. I have some firearms, for example, that shoot Hornady ammunition really well. And for example, the Hornady SSTs are a really good round for deer. I have one firearm that will absolutely love the Hornady SSTs, but if I try to feed that same round in one of my Winchesters, it doesn't like it at all. Don't be surprised. It's a good idea to do a little exploration to see what type of ammo your particular firearm likes. Some of them if you're lucky, you'll get a firearm that likes the cheap stuff. Remington core locks, very cheap ammo compared to something like Nosler. And I've seen guns that love core lock. So if your gun can shoot a cheaper ammo and get a really good group, maybe that's all you need. But if you're getting, 2-inch groups or more at 100 yards and you want to see if you can do a little better, try a different type of cartridge, and those group sizes may shrink a little bit. But bottom line, once you get your firearm sighted in with the cartridge of choice and you're happy with your group size, don't deviate during the hunting season because your point of impact can change dramatically if you switch brands. And I think, Liz, that we're ready for questions.
All right, excellent. That was fantastic. A lot of information. So I'm sure we have a lot of good questions coming up. You guys can either put questions in the chat box or you can raise your hand. And let's see. All right, we've got one from Justin.
Wanted to ask, with cleaning a gun, would you be opposed to using brake parts cleaner to get like carbon off and stuff like that?
So what type of cleaner was that?
Brake parts cleaner, like what you can get at AutoZone.
That's a good question. I don't have the answer for that because I don't know what the components are in that. I'm not familiar with that that specific cleaner. You could probably do a Google search to see if that's commonly used and what the pros and cons are. To be honest with you, I do that quite a bit when I'm researching a new solvent that I haven't read before. I'll look for, especially if you go on to some of the more advanced firearms forums, they'll give you the pros and cons of particular products. I have not used that. I haven't heard of it being used, so I'd be afraid to say yay or nay, but it might be easy to do some background research and see if there's any cons about using that.
Okay. And a subsequent question. I have a 22 Magnum rifle. For the life of me, I cannot get a brush to go down from the bolt end. I have to go from the muzzle end. Have you ever encountered something like that? Is it possible that the design of the gun or is user error?
Actually, yeah, it's funny you should say that. 22 Magnum is one of my pets. I love that particular cartridge. I use a brush that I use for 22 rimfire, and I haven't had any issues at all. I do now. I've never tried, and I hope to never have to try to clean it from the barrel end. Are you saying that when you're going through the action, you're having a hard time getting the brush to go through?
Yes. The way it's set up, there's no way that I can get a rod and a brush from the end, even with the bolt completely out. There's no way for me to get the brush and assembly in. There's just too many components in the way that push it one way or another.
What type of 22 do you have?
Rossi RB22M.
Okay. The only reason I brought that up is it is possible you might want to get your owner's manual for that Rossi. Kimber has a 22 mag that they have a very small metal piece that, and they'll tell you in their owner's manual that working a brush can be a little bit problematic with that particular model. I don't know if that's the case for the Rossi or not, but yeah, generally, unless there's something special with the construction of that particular 22 Magnum, you should be able to just put a bore guide in. Let me ask you one more question. What type of cleaning rod? Are you using one of the multi-piece cleaning rods, or are you using a one-piece?
So far, I've used a multi-piece cleaning rod.
That might be some of your problem. With a multi-piece cleaning rod, those things can bend and flex as you're cleaning. It's not very expensive and I tell you, it's a really good investment. I've gotten a Dewey coated cleaning rod, and I've got it long enough, and they do make them in different lengths. Measure your longest barrel of your whatever barrel has that you have that's the longest. Get a rod at least that long, and you can use it to clean multiple firearms. But if you put a 22 jag or a 22 brush on a straight rod, you might see a big difference in performance versus using one of the multi-piece cleaning rods. The other advice is go back to that owner's manual and just see if there's anything in that owner's manual about a special technique they want you to use. Because I know that with the Kimber that I tried to clean at one time, I had a massive issue because I didn't read that owner's manual, and it told me, please be careful. There's a piece that sticks out slightly that you can hit, and that caused some problems.
Okay, I'll take a gander at that again and see if I overlooked something.
Yeah, and I would do whatever you can to clean it from the action end, because or if you absolutely do have to clean from the barrel end, that could be easier done with a straight rod too. I think you're going to have far less damage to your crown area if you're using a good coated cleaning rod like a Dewey. So that's another advantage. If you can't figure out how to clean that from the action and you have to go with the barrel, then I would definitely consider getting one of these coated cleaning rods, because that's going to minimize damage to that barrel area, the crown area at the end of your barrel.
Okay. Yeah, I'll add that to my list next time I go to Academy.
All right, great questions, Justin. How about Tom? And Tom, did you have a question you'd like to ask Brian?
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Sorry. I'm rifle shopping, and I want to buy something that I can use for deer hunting and also my kids, age 10 and 12. So I was thinking something like a 243. What would you recommend?
Well, I can tell you that. How old did you say? How old did you say the kid was?
One is 12 and one is 10.
Okay, 12-year-old. You're going to want to focus on something that's very nice in the recoil department. The last thing you want to do Just hand the 12-year-old a 30-06 and say, here, go for it. A 243 is a good choice for youth hunters. They do have, and Liz, is it okay if I back up to the slide to show the ballistic slide real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
So if you're looking at the 243, here we go. If you look at the very top, 243 with a good 100 grain PowerPoint bullet, which is right here. Look at your energy levels. You don't fall below 1,000 until you get past 300 yards. I mean, so you're talking about a very effective deer gun out to about 300 yards. And your recoil levels, this is what you want to focus on right here. That is a very good gun for a smaller framed or a younger hunter. I would also consider you to look at a few other possible candidates. If I've got someone in that age range or someone smaller in stature, a 243 would serve them well even when they got older. I mean, it's got the energy to cleanly harvest a whitetail out to 300 yards. Another one that's, and I've got some experience with both of these cartridges, if you drop down to the 6.5 Creedmoor, which is really popular right now, that's still very, very manageable on the recoil side. And the other one that you might want to consider as part of that trio would be the 7mm 08 Remington. All three of these are somewhere in that ballpark where the recoil is going to be much more manageable to a first-time hunter. Those three would probably be, I would think, need to be taken under consideration, but I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. I mean, if you look at the energy, most people in North Carolina will probably never take a 200-yard shot at a whitetail. The energy level on all three of these cartridges is well over 1,000 foot-pounds, so I don't think you could go wrong with either one of them. A lot of your decision may come down to what rifle do you really want, and is it chambered in one of these three cartridges? Now, I would shy away from some of the heavier hitters, like even the 270. You're starting to get up into 16, 17 foot-pounds. Yes, it's possible that you could get a heavier rifle chambered for 270 that might knock this recoil down a little bit more, but I think these three would primarily be the three that I would take into consideration for younger hunters. And all three of these cartridges are fantastic deer killers. The 708 and the 6.5, you're not going to find, well, the 6.5 you will. The 708 might be a little bit harder to find. And I'm laughing as I'm saying this because I realize right now everything's hard to find. But assuming we get back to normal, the 7mm 08 can be a little bit harder to find than the other two, but all three would be great choices.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Any particular brand you prefer more than others?
Oh boy, that is a loaded question. Everybody has their favorites. I can tell you this right now. I've seen there's a lot of Ruger Americans are real popular. A lot of the Savages are real popular. Both of those are great guns, and both of them are going to do everything you want to right out of the box. It really depends on your personal choice. I've shot Remington 700s, and at one time I was a little bit concerned that they might be going the way of the dodo, but now they're starting to bring back, for those of you who may not know what I'm talking about, Remington seemed like they were going to be bought off and split up into smaller chunks, but they are bringing some of the Remington firearms back. The Remington 700 is widely used, very trusted gun. Winchester Model 70 is a fantastic gun. You're going to be paying a little bit more for the 70 and some of the higher level Model 700s, but it really does depend on your choice. I don't think you can go wrong with, a Savage, a Ruger, Winchester, a Remington. It really, you have to sit back and ask yourself, which one do you prefer? And a lot of that comes with handling the firearm. Do not buy a firearm until you can actually handle it. And that really comes into play with a younger hunter. You want to make sure that that firearm is comfortable for their smaller frame body. It might be possible that you might have to get a youth model that's slightly scaled down from a full-size adult model. So I would encourage you to do two things, and both of these are fun things. Go look at firearms. Handle as many different firearms as you can. and you can focus on firearms, that are chambered in these 3 cartridges, and get a feel for what really feels good for you. Sky's the limit in what you can spend on a firearm, but I can tell you, from the cheapest Savage out of the box, it is very capable of taking deer. The Savage has a real good reputation of accuracy out of the box. Remington, Winchester, Ruger, I don't think you can go wrong with any of those, but it must feel good in your hands. And the only way you're going to know that is to actually hold it. Get used to how the bolt, if you're going for a bolt action, that is, actually work the bolt actions on some of them. Get a feel for what they feel like in your hands, and I think you'll be well equipped to make that decision.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, let's go to our next question from Ralph.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. I think you did a good job on covering the cleaning of the bolt action firearm. I have a couple of nephews that'll be watching the recording of this, and I want you to cover this for them. I know you frown upon entering the barrel from the muzzle end, but cleaning automatic, how would your process differ from cleaning, entering from the rear on the bolt action?
That's a great question. On some of the action types, they're not going to lend themselves to cleaning like I normally would a bolt action. And that's the previous answer I gave the gentleman earlier. If you do have an action type where you have to clean from the barrel end, I would do 2 things. If you absolutely have to clean from the barrel end, use a good coated cleaning rod. Because if you do, that just makes it much easier on the barrel if you've got a coated cleaning rod. And if it's a 1-piece cleaning rod, you can reasonably be confident that you're pushing that rod through straight. So that would be my first advice. The second advice I could give you, if you are cleaning, if you do have to clean from the barrel end, the muzzle end, store your gun upside down. The one thing that I try to avoid if I do have to go from the barrel end is I do not like solvents pouring into the action area. So if you do have an action type that you have to clean from the barrel end, absolutely you can do it, and you can do it safely. You just got to do it a lot more carefully and deliberately. Clean your barrel, and then immediately when you're finished, hang your gun upside down to let those solvents not work themselves into the action area. Does that help?
Great point. That's what I was trying to get at.
No, thank you.
All right, Robert, do you have a question?
Yep, I have 2 questions. One's a general, one's a personal. For my general questions, what do you recommend the first thing you do if you buy a used gun?
If you're going to buy a used gun, it depends on if you're buying a used gun. The first thing I would do is take it to a reputable gunsmith and have them check it out for functionality first and foremost. Now, they might also be able to give you some information that maybe you don't know about. If you don't have a bore scope, it might be worthwhile, especially if you're considering buying an expensive used gun. You might want to take that and have a gunsmith check it out just to look at the rifling in the barrel. The last thing I would want to do, for example, is go out and buy a very expensive 25-06, which is a very fast velocity cartridge, and only to find out that the rifling has just been shot to pieces. So if it's an expensive gun, you might want to have them look it out just for your benefit to make sure you're not buying a gun with a barrel that's been shot out. But in most cases, that's not going to be the case. I would still have a gunsmith check it out for functionality to make sure that the gun is safe to use for you. Most gunsmiths would probably charge a very minimal fee just to make sure that it's a solid functional firearm, but I think that's money well spent, especially if you're not used to firearms at all and can't do some of the the checks yourself. That would be the best advice I could give you.
Okay, sweet. And then my personal question. So I just bought a new rifle, new scope, and when I put that scope on, I just wanted to put it on just because I was juggling 2 things at once. Is I'm trying to think of the scope manufacturer is the same as the ring manufacturer, but when I tie in the rings, it didn't seem like it closed all the way. Is that supposed to feel like that, or is that because I haven't torqued it to the right percentage?
So let me make sure I understand your question right. So the scope is inside the rings, and you're tightening down the top cap, and it doesn't feel like it's tightening up.
So the rings is a one. It has screws on both sides, so you kind of do the circle to tighten them all.
Okay. So you're talking about putting the rings onto your bases on your gun. Okay, I'm following you.
It's already on the base of the gun.
Okay.
So I put the scope on, then I tighten up the screws on the rings to tighten up the scope, but it still feels like it's not like completely like tied down, because it seems like there's like a little line you can see between on one side. Is that just because I haven't? Right?
Okay. Yeah. So let me show you. I think I know exactly what you're talking about. So you're saying if you look right here in between the two lines where the metal meet, you still see a crack?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's not a problem. What that means is when you install the top cap, you didn't apply equal pressure on both sides. If you want that space to minimize, just loosen the other side and tighten down the other side. You will have a small, those spaces are not going to be absolutely solid. You will have a space on each side. That's absolutely normal. The only thing that might bug you is if one space on one side is bigger than the other, just loosen the screws on the other side and balance it so that it's a balancing act. If the screws are torqued down on one side more, you're going to have a gap bigger on the other side. Does that make sense? But it's absolutely normal. If you were to look at the, matter of fact, you can probably see it right here. Do you see the space between where these two rings come? I don't think I can blow that slide up, but what you're saying is normal. You're not going to be able to tighten that down so that there's no space. You will see a small space.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure, just because it's my first scope that I got, so it's definitely new, and I bought a used gun, so that's why I was kind of curious about that too. But yeah, that all makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Okay, if we do, speak up. We've got a few more minutes.
Oops.
All right, we've got a question from Merlin. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question about preference on barrel length of the rifle.
That's a great question. I think barrel length depends on a couple of things. Number one, if you're in the market for a lightweight gun that's easy to handle in the woods, let's say, for example, you want a 7mm 08 and you expect to be going through the brush quite a bit and you want a light handling, fast pointing gun, then you might want to look at a 22-inch barrel. Now, is it true that you might lose a little bit of velocity with a 22-inch barrel versus the standard 24? Yes. But the little bit of velocity you lose is not going to translate. I mean, it'll still be well capable of harvesting whitetail. Now, if you're shooting a larger cartridge like a 7mm mag or a 300 mag, I personally do not like my magnums. I have a 7 and a 300 that I shoot quite a bit. I like a 26-inch barrel in those because that 26-inch barrel lets me wring every bit of velocity out of those cartridges. Now, a 26-inch barrel has its drawbacks. It can be very painful to take a 26-inch tube around through heavy woods where the barrel's catching everything in sight. So if I'm hunting a thick area and I'm going to be going through brush, I like a smaller barrel, 22, 24-inch. None of my barrels are 22. I usually like the 24 inches, to be honest with you. But I have a good friend who has a 708 with a 22-inch barrel, and that is a beautiful gun. It's a joy to shoot with. I mean, it's a joy to carry. So I think it gets to be a personal choice with the higher velocity cartridges, especially the magnums. The 26-inch barrels, and some people even use longer barrels, believe it or not. 26 is the absolute longest I want to go. But my general rule of thumb is if I'm shooting magnums like a 7mm or a 300, I try to get 26-inch barrels. Standard cartridges like the 30-06, 270 cartridges in that family, I use 24-inch barrels. And if I want something that's that I need special for carrying around in the thicker stuff, 708, or even a 270. I mean, you can shorten a barrel down. There's only one drawback to shortening down the barrel on a cartridge like a 270 is you'll get a little bit more noise because you're a little bit closer to the end of the barrel. But I think it's a personal choice to a degree. Again, I do have a preference for 26-inch barrels in the heavier hitting cartridges, especially the Speed Demons. But 24 inches on most of my guns is what is my standard. I hope that answers your question to some degree.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right, any others? Okay, if not, we'll go ahead and go over our last couple of slides for the evening. And yeah, so I first of all want to thank Brian for such a great webinar tonight, and we appreciate all the information that he provided. And I want to thank New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program for everything they're doing to do the Learn to Deer Hunt series. And thank you all for participating tonight. You will receive a post-event email, and there will be links in there for materials on today's topic. And then we'll also have a recording of the webinar that we will put on the YouTube page. So you'll have access to that too, to go back and review some of the material that Brian provided. And we'll also send out a link for you guys to register for our next webinar, which will be 2 weeks from tonight. And so if you have any questions, I'm sure Brian and other folks in the New Hill Hunter Education and Mentoring Program would be happy to answer those via email or check out the Facebook page. And I just want to say, if you guys are interested in learning more about the Wildlife Federation or joining a chapter to do conservation work or environmental work, just check out our website at ncwf.org. And yeah, we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. So thank you for attending.
Okay, thank you so much, Liz.
All right. Thank you, Brian. And on that note, we will go ahead and wrap this up for this evening. So thank you all for attending.